My name is Monica Takis. I am Senior Director for Industry Networks here at the Pittsburgh Technology Council. Thank you so much for coming to today's program on the supply chain crisis. So we're really excited to have this distinguished panel with us today. Before we get started with today's discussion, I want to make sure that you are aware of a few upcoming events that we have here at the Pittsburgh Technology Council. So next week on the morning of June the 17th, we will host a virtual CIO Insights with IT leaders from JV Manufacturing, the Oncology Nursing Society, Allegheny Health Network, and Tri-State Capital Bank. On the same day, we will host PA Representative Ed Gainey, who on our new program, Beyond Business as Usual. So this program, this replaces our former daily show that we did every day at noon. And so this will, going forward, we'll do this on a periodic basis. And this will happen at 2 p.m., so not at noon. I know everyone's eager to have lunch outside and meet with colleagues at this point. Another program that we have, if you do have a daughter who's interested in STEM careers, we'll be holding a summer cohort called Launch. It starts on June the 29th. It's for 10th and 11th grade girls that are interested in gaining career and leadership skills in the world of STEM. So if you are interested in that program for a daughter that you may have, please let me know and I will connect you with my colleague, Marie. And then we have many other programs that will be launching later this summer, including the return of some in-person events. So make sure to visit the PTC website for all of those details, and I will put the link in there in the chat so you can access all of those programs. So after the panel discussion, you're welcome to stick around for some networking time so you can meet some of the others in attendance. We'll do this roundtable style. You'll have the opportunity to introduce yourself and give a brief introduction of your company. We also invite you to share a challenge that you're looking to solve. So, we have a lot of great minds and innovative companies here today. And, somebody in the room here may have a solution to your problem. So make sure to stick around for that. And then at this time, I'm very, very pleased to introduce David Owinski, who is the Managing Director of Blue Water Growth, who is our partner and moderator on today's event. So welcome, David. Thanks for being here.
Okay. Thank you so much, Monica, and many thanks to the Pittsburgh Technology Council for hosting this event today. This is such a hot issue, and it's touched so many companies and so many people. And so we're very fortunate to have a great panel. And we're going to start off with some kind of introductory comments, how we got here and set the stage, and then we'll introduce our panel and hear from them. Well, back in February 6th, 2020, we at Blue Water Growth issued an uncharacteristic 4,000-word newsletter that basically said the supply chain world is going to get turned upside down. And a lot of folks were pretty skeptical about some of our predictions. We talked about empty shelves, and what we suggested even then was permanent disruption. And why did we think that? COVID was part of it. Most definitely what happened in China, migrating to the United States and resulting in a very difficult, of course, from a public health perspective, but from a business perspective as well, entire year of pandemic was part, but it really wasn't the only thing. And in fact, arguably just one of many factors that led to this turbulence in the supply chain world. We've been so connected with China, but China has had a series of issues. Now, through Blue Water Growth, we do international trade, global merger acquisition work, but I personally have been going to China for 35 years, lived there for 5 years, ran factories, and so consider myself reasonably connected with what's happening there. There have been some behind the scenes mega trends, not really apparent in the North American side. Wages have been going up steadily and aggressively, and it's no longer a cheap place to do work. They've got a debt crisis that's enormous, a housing bubble that's fueling rampant inflation, unemployment being driven not so much by cheap labor elsewhere, but by automation, and an environmental crisis that everybody is aware of. On top of that, there's some internal political issues, and as we all know, they're dealing with some issues with the Uyghurs And so that's creating issues, as well as what's happening with Hong Kong. And then on top of that, there are regional conflicts with other people as they attempt to expand their political footprint. And then you've got aggressive competitors, folks in that region, and I'm talking now the folks like in Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, India, Indonesia, the Philippines. They have been coming on strong. They've been studying the China economic miracle for a while. And then finally arrives on the scene President Donald Trump. And political opinions, of course, run the gamut on Mr. Trump as president. But one thing I think both sides would agree, he is truly in the modern age one of the first to take on China. And even my colleagues in China say every presidential election, both sides talk tough until the election's over, and then it's back to doing whatever we need them to do. Well, not anymore. And so the tariffs are in place, and it really created a lot of turmoil. So that was the scene that was set. Then we started to see what was predicted. As of April, there were already 250,000 Chinese companies went bankrupt. By mid-year, South China Morning Post documented 460,000 companies in China bankrupt. And this led, we think by the end of the year, well over 1 million bankruptcies. And yes, maybe some of them were, noodle shops and delivery services, but not all of them. A lot of them were industrial. And part of the reason is that access to working capital to help them through the pandemic crisis, not so readily available. And you also had the issue that they were shut down for their pandemic internally. As they're coming out of it, that's when America shut down. So they actually got economically a harder hit than we did. So what happens is you've got a lot of companies now out of business. Their bankruptcy rate 14,000% higher than North America. And that led to, for the first time since Mao's death, when Mao passed away in '76, you had steady economic growth every quarter. Now, for the first time, Q1 2020, a 10% contraction, kind of earth-shattering. So all of these other factors, not just the little, the blip of COVID, now it's not going back to the old ways, and we don't think it ever will. US companies are feeling the hit. We're going to have a few statistics in a moment on that. Consumers are feeling it. Prices are rising. Shortages are in play. And it really doesn't appear to be, from our perspective, something that's temporary. And those companies that are naively, in my opinion, and I'll say that, assuming that it is, are going to have it the worst. Where are we right now? Well, there was a recent survey of 200 senior supply chain executives from Fortune 500 companies, all making over $1 billion in revenue, so sizable firms. 55% said that they had been seriously negatively affected by the supply chain crisis. It's not just the COVID crisis, but the resulting supply chain problems that have come out of it. 17% said that it was a serious negative event. That means 72% of these executives in the Fortune 500 are talking about what they consider serious effects from the supply chain crisis. When you go to another survey of similar executives, these again are people in retail, manufacturing, service businesses. 90% say that they expect there to be long-term supply chain disruptions. 99% say they have already been negatively affected. Demand reductions, inventory reductions, shipping costs, price fluctuations, and a full 90% fear a similar scenario in years to come in re-emerging future waves. So again, even if it were the case that COVID were never to come back, we have a super effective vaccine. The way the business community is looking at this now is we've learned a lesson. And this is the primary reason why we at Blue Water believe it's never going to go back to the good old days. The United States learned a lesson. We learned that super high dependency on China, very problematic. Ventilators invented here can't be made here. Face masks couldn't be found. A whole lot of things that aren't on the shelves now originally originated with US technology. So we're saying never again. We have to diversify, we have to reshore, we have to think about our long-term stability. China, at the same time, has learned the same lesson. They too are now saying our overdependence on the American market led to over 1 million companies going under. Rather than a 3-month ripple, it was catastrophic. So we simply cannot go back to the way it used to be. So 2020, in many ways, including this thing we're doing now, right? How many people in 2019 thought Zoom was the sound you heard when a car went past? Now it's part of our daily life, and it's not going to go back to 2018 mindsets anytime soon. So with all of this in mind, we've got a serious problem, and we've got a tremendous panel of very experienced people who are going to give some thoughts and insights. And I'd like to introduce each one of them and let them give a few moments about their background and then go on to some analysis. Let's start with Dr. Jim Hayes. He's the COO of Marine Electric Systems in Hoboken. Jim, tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure, Dave, it's actually a beautiful downtown South Hackensack, but you were close. Sure, so as Dave mentioned, I am the Chief Operating Officer at Marine Electric Systems. Marine Electric is a 78-year-old contract manufacturer whose primary business is for the U.S. military and in particular the U.S. Navy. So, our supply chain issues are very interesting because we tend to help the Navy and other parts of the military support legacy systems. If you think about ships, they last many, many years, planes, tracked vehicles. And so the military needs to support these systems over a long period of time, and sometimes long after the original equipment manufacturer has decided they no longer want to support it. That's where we step in. We do re-engineering, we do the manufacturing, we have capabilities around machining and printed circuit board manufacturing. And so the issue for us is that we've never been dependent on China because by law that's not possible. But what we're finding, and we'll go into it more deeply, is that as more people are onshoring their manufacturing, it's an opportunity for us because they're looking at companies like ours, but it's also a problem because they're now tapping into the same supply chains that we were used to having to ourselves, or certainly having a big part of. And so it's really absolutely changing the way we do business. I came out of a background of large industry, so companies like Eaton, Motorola, Wabtec locally in Pittsburgh, and so always managed to maximize cash and minimize inventory. I think that is a paradigm that's going to change, as we'll discuss later. And so I've really had to change my big company mindset to the new post-COVID environment and to working at a smaller company. And I hope to share those insights with you as we go forward.
Thanks, Jim. And I'd like to introduce now Justin Hyrb. Justin is a category manager at United States Steel.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Good morning, everyone. So as Dave mentioned, United States Steel, if anyone's from the Pittsburgh area, the name's Carnegie, and United States Steel should definitely ring a bell. So I work on our capital expenditures and plant services team. I'm a category manager. I have roughly 300 million under my spend. While most of our spend does take place in America, we do have an international presence with operations in Košice. My background in college, I had many internship opportunities at DuPont, Big Four Consulting, and aerospace with Curtiss Wright Corporation. And my main major of study was in supply chain management. Right now, I'm taking some master's classes through MIT, and I'm really happy to be on the panel today and share some of the insights that I've seen so far.
Thanks, Justin. And I'd also like now to introduce Nick Parmar. He's the Director of New Business Development at Innovative Electronics Corporation here in Pittsburgh.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. Thanks PTC and Blue Water to make this event possible. I represent Innovative Electronics. We are an electronics contract manufacturer. We are in the electronics manufacturing industry since late 80s. We are in the Pittsburgh regions at our current location since 1993. We are a group of 4 companies serving the electronics manufacturing OEMs. All 4 locations are in the Northeast. We are ISO 13485 certified, FDA registered for Class C medical devices, aerospace defense, AS9100 certified. This is a critical moment, the new normal about the supply chain issues. So we are right in the trenches. We see this day in and out, how the commodities and how the semiconductor industry is affecting the entire supply chain. Not only just the manufacturing, but how the freight industry, how the labor market. So everything is intertwined and how it's affecting. So we are right in front, working with the customers, commodity managers day in and out. We are happy to be here and share our experience.
Thanks, Nick. And finally, Ricardo Iriart, he's principal at Noblia Advisors. Ricardo, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yes, thank you, David, and good morning. Well, my name is Ricardo Iriart. I'm principal and founder of Noblia Advisors. It's a pleasure to be a part of this panel hosted by the Pittsburgh Technology Council today. I'm a business executive and advisor with particular experience in manufacturing, metals, and international business. I'm originally from Argentina. I work for American global companies in different geographies. It's interesting that one of those experiences was with Goodyear, and I was there through the 90s and early 2000s when all American companies were building up their presence in China, and it's interesting to see how it's playing out in our situation today. I relocated permanently here to the US in 2000, and I am a proud Pittsburgh resident since 2008. So again, thank you for the invitation to participate in this conversation today on supply chain, which is very timely and critical subject, and happy to be here in this panel.
Thanks, Ricardo. Yeah, and I would only point out that saying you're a proud Pittsburgh resident is a redundancy. There's no other kind. All right, so let's dive in, and I think we're gonna mix it up a little bit. We're gonna start with Justin. Tell us a bit about what's happening at US Steel, some current issues you're facing, what you're doing to counter those, and we'll go around the horn. Let's say everybody take, let's say, 3 or 4 minutes to give an overview of your current industry situation, and then we'll go to some Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So I guess to speak overall, some of the changes and whirlwinds whenever you talk, and as Dave alluded to, from 2019 even till now, just in 2 years, it's been a whirlwind to say the least. With me personally dealing with a lot more service contractors and looking at a lot of union halls and the current labor market, some of the challenges that we're really facing right now is just some of these rising costs, a lot of these fluctuations. And through that, it's really put on us, how do we still manage effective supplier relationship without seeing costs go up dramatically and really controlling our external spend? So some of the big challenges I'd say across the board that we really value the long-term partnerships, dealing with some of these suppliers and making sure that we have wins for both sides, because last year showed that not only were we the consumer hit, but everybody was hit. So from that alone, how do we go about managing these partnerships in an effective way while making sure that we still maintain win-win solutions that still fit to our strategic goals?
I was on mute. Jim, how about if we jump into you next?
Yeah, thanks, David. So I kind of referred to it in my introduction, but for us, the big issue has been, our inventory management and having access to product. We're a small company, and so what I try and do is manage for cash flow, like many companies, around the country. And one of the big cash flow items that companies need to worry about is inventory. And we've always been taught, at least for the last 30 years, that we've been this move to just in time, have minimal inventory, minimal stocking levels, and the post-COVID world is really, I wouldn't say turn it on its head, but it's definitely made me rethink those kind of precepts. So Justin mentioned the commodity prices. We've seen we have a major metal that we use in some of our products, and we've seen it compound average growth over the last 5 years up 40%. So on average every year. So building that into long-term contracts and having clauses on pricing is hard when you're working with the government that tends to resist those. We, in terms of managing our inventory, have to calculate, we look at lead times and we try and, stagger the timing that we get our inventory in to match the production cycle so that we can turn, inventory into cash the quickest way possible. Well, so now, where some things might have had 12-week, 20-week, even 50-week inventories, we're seeing that now extend to 24 weeks, 100 weeks. We got the last order we had for a special cable we used, we were given 80-week lead times. So, so trying to plan in that type of environment, it has really, thrown a monkey wrench into, kind of looking at historical numbers. I don't think you're going to look at historical numbers anymore. And so the last thing that brings me to is then, in terms of just-in-time inventory, we're actually now thinking, we need to have precautionary inventory. So in part of our risk management now is that we need to have security stocks of certain key items so that we don't get into a situation where there's a supply chain disruption for whatever reason. Some ship runs aground in the Suez Canal. As unlikely as that is to happen. And then you need to worry about, being able to produce. And again, we're a small company. If we can't produce, if we miss a month, it has big repercussions for our bottom line. So inventory management is an area that I'm spending a lot of time on myself, and I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't reverberating across the industry.
Thanks, Jim. And Nick, how about you with innovative electronics? Current situation, challenges, some things that you folks are wrestling with today.
Great. So electronics manufacturing. So typically on our BOM, we see maybe 100, 200 line items, and it touches a lot of commodities from not only just the electronics, but it can be plastics to metals. So we are not just facing issues in one particular commodity, we are seeing that across the board. So as Dr. Jim mentioned that, planning and the inventory management is the key right now. We might have a 80% BOM, which is clear to build, but 5 or 10 components might be throwing off the entire build. So the challenges are obviously the material availability. The lead times have gone significant. The lead time because of our manufacturers, lead time because of increased, freight lead times. So all added up, the lead times, back in pre-COVID world, which was weeks, are now, 10 times the pre-COVID lead times. The other thing we are seeing is that we have to be very flexible with our manufacturing. The planning is on a weekly basis because of the material availability and last minute surprise, I would say. A vendor would commit on certain components, material is coming in and it's a no-show. So there are a lot of challenges. The main thing for us right now is to be flexible, manage customers' expectation. We manage a lot of projects where they are project-based manufacturing, and then there are product-based manufacturing. So we have two sets of customers and managing their expectation, educating them, informing them on what's going on in our world has been critical. I think we are at that point that everybody knows, the current issues. It was a challenge 6-8 months ago to talk to a commodity manager that, a 4-week lead time right now is 16 or 20 or 50-week lead time. So the more in the news is always better. But to sum it up, it's affecting from top down every aspect of our business.
Thank you, Nick. And then Ricardo, some observations on your organization and your clients.
Yes, thank you, David. I think that one thing that has been unique about this pandemic and its impact on the economy is not so much the fact that it led to a recession, but it was a very short recession, and it resulted in a steep recovery now in 2021, which I believe was unexpected, and that has created issues like, for instance, I was seeing in the metal fabrication industry, which I was working on in the recent past. In that segment, you saw increase of, I would say, across the board, but probably the most important one was steel products, things such as tubing and plate and wire, some of which, in a very short period of time increased 50, 60%. But again, lumber was another important factor as well. And probably that was even compounded by freight. And in many cases, this was not only a question of cost, it was also a question of simple availability. I mean, you could not even get the product. So I think that a couple of at least anecdotal experiences that I have seen in that space are companies that are actually already making the decision to resource product into the United States. Now, of course, this cannot be done across the board. It's probably more for certain products, higher value added products where inventory and short delivery times are critical. But in any case, this is something that is happening, and it's happening right now. And the other thing that I would also want to mention is that I have also seen in other industries, for instance, hardware industry in the United States, that companies have already moved, as you were mentioning in your introduction, David, to other points of sourcing, places like Taiwan and Vietnam. I actually know a company that for them it was a very strategic advantage that they had their products online, and many competitors had also the same products, but they were the only ones who actually had the access to the product. So this was a big advantage to them. And in going on that line, I think that obviously other countries in Southeast Asia and generally Asia Pacific region, are natural alternatives. But I would also bring up the point of, if you look at the countries from which the United States imports product, well, the first one is China, but April year to date, the second one is Mexico. We imported 151 billion from China. We imported 122 billion from Mexico. Mexico really supplies a wide range of products. We're probably familiar with automotive, for instance, but also electrical machinery, appliances, and also high-end products like smartphones and medical equipment. So again, this is something that probably was, building over a long period of time when cost of labor, in particular in China, was catching up with costs in other parts of the world. And right now, I think that Latin America, for instance, at least for the US in particular, maybe not so much for Europe, but in any case for the US, is a natural alternative to consider.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to go now to some questions that I've got for the panel, and we're going to mix it up a little bit. I'd like to start with Nick and Jim, and whichever you guys wants to go first can just dive in. Talking to companies regionally, folks are struggling with the immediacy of, I can't get this part, I can't get this circuit board, which is one kind of problem. But the longer term issue is, if they've got supply chains that are narrowed down by obsessive focus on EBITDA and consolidating purchases, so that they have very narrow and often very single point purchases, that's a long-term problem that's a little more systemic. When looking at the challenges that you face and that your customers face, how do you balance stopping and re-looking at the whole system versus just having to deal with the problem of the moment, the long-term versus short-term? Nick, why don't you jump in on this one first, and then we'll hear from Jim.
Sure. So the short term, we are just trying to find what's available out there to keep the pipeline going. The long term, we are working with our customers, requesting them, to take a look at the design. Obviously, substitutes, alternates to begin with. That's the first key. The more components are substituted on a BOM allows us to be flexible enough in our supply chain, in our procurement. What we are doing from our end is we are putting a lot of efforts on the front end. When the job comes in, we bring in a lot of data for the customer to make a wise decision. Short term, again, just buy whatever is available and fill in the pipeline. The long term, the customer and their management has to be on the same page to make those certain investment for redesigning, putting engineering efforts, putting procurement efforts, and obviously working with us. We are not just a manufacturer, we are a strategic partner. And the more companies they look at us as a strategic partner is always better for them. We are willing to work a lot more efficiently if the customer allows us to look at their supply chain much closer. So all in all, our strategy is to be with customer, put in a lot of efforts. It may be engineering efforts, or it can be from the supply chain side.
Thanks. Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'll echo what Nick said in terms of the short term. You just want to get the product as best you can. We're a little different. We, as primarily a military supplier, we can only use parts that have been qualified, typically by the military, by some process, through the military. So it's not easy for us to say, we're out of cable XYZ, we're just going to transfer and start using cable ABC, because that would require qualification. And so what we do to balance that is to, like I said, we're starting to maintain some precautionary inventory, so that we, so that's how we're dealing with the short term. In the long term, we're looking at, qualifying new suppliers, so that we have some sort of qualified second source for most of the at least the core products we use. Now, we're a small company, and so in some cases that's not possible because we would never have enough purchasing power to justify the expense of qualifying a new source. And so again, that's when we fall back on the inventory strategy.
Okay, one thing I'd like to add to those answers, and again, we've seen this in a number of folks that we've spoken to. In the short term, we're all agreed. If you can find it, buy it, stockpile it to get yourself through the crisis. But sometimes it occurs that the solution to a long-term issue might be redesign. And occasionally folks that have come to us and said, we need help finding this thing, you find out that particular, some of the components that they're looking for, they haven't changed or revisited the design in a decade, and some of the parts are obsoleted. So occasionally I think a redesign or a re-examination of the product functionality and the parts that go into it might actually lead to an opportunity to then find things that are more readily available now. But in a completely different direction, when you look at, and Ricardo, you'd mentioned this, I'd like you and Justin to tackle this one. We get a lot from Mexico, which was hit by COVID, but not nearly as hard as China. How do you balance folks that, let's say they had a China supplier or 2 or 10 that are suddenly gone? Now they've got to look at a range of other Chinese companies versus moving to Southeast Asia versus Latin America. How do you give them guidance on what's the most important way to go about this tough decision, particularly when they're under pressure? And I'd like Ricardo and Justin to tackle that one.
Sure. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, how about you start off?
So, David, I think that's a great question. And I think that it has a lot to do with, I believe, two things. One is you really want to look into what is your optimal diversification of supply points. Meaning on the one side, you probably don't want to be dependent on one single source, but on the other hand, you probably don't want to have too many. So that is, what is the right balance for the right type of product, and that may, the type of product and the specific kind of idiosyncrasies of the supply chain of each one could drive that decision. But the other thing is, again, looking at what is specific strengths of each one of those markets, and also what is the overall environment for investment. I think, again, that if you look at I don't know, the chip manufacturers, for instance, Korea and Hong Kong are places that come to mind. I was making a few examples about Mexico, which really today supplies a very wide, broad range of products to the United States. But for instance, if you look at other places in Latin America, for instance, just anecdotally, I don't know if you have ever noticed, but the majority of the commuter planes here in the United States are manufactured by a company called Embraer in Brazil. And also, just to make a little reference to my own home country. Right now, for instance, I didn't know about this, but Mercedes-Benz is a company that has a presence in Argentina, and some of the Sprint vans that Amazon uses today to deliver product in the US are coming from Argentina as well. Again, I think that it has a little bit to do with the competitive advantages of each one of those industries, potential industries in each country, and also the overall environment for investment. I did help a couple of companies in the past with an overall analysis of political and economical, regulatory investment environment for each one of these countries, because again, these are long-term decisions, and there are countries where you do want to make a long-term investment, and somewhere maybe it's better to have still a presence, but maybe you don't want to necessarily make a direct investment that rely more on local partners.
Okay, Justin, how about you? What do you think about that question?
Yeah, so just speaking like holistically here, no matter where you were sourcing from, whether it was like China, other parts of Asia, just looking at, getting back to some of the things you mentioned at the beginning of this, Dave, some of those statistics, I think it really ties into the theme that if you look at supply chain and purchasing in particular before 2019, I think the theme of it became easy was very apparent for many companies in the US. We found a sourcing methodology somewhere where we entered into a long-term contract. It was good pricing at the time when we did this 5-10 years ago, and it was smooth with our operations, and we haven't looked at it since. And I think the big thing here, what this leads into, is showing, and even this last year in particular, has shown us that even if we think we're safe, we might not be. Even if we think we have a very strong contract, because it was when we did it 5 years ago, that might not align with our current market and all of the just crazy trends that we're seeing and witnessing firsthand now. So I think when you talk about like single sourcing methods to Asia and other methodologies like that, I think now is really the time to reassess whether that's internally or reassess just as a whole. Is what we're doing right now in the partners that we have, does that make the most sense moving forward? Does that align with operation? And is that what's strongest to us from both a working capital and a EBITDA improvement perspective?
I think that's great insight, and that the function of what used to be called purchasing and now has supply chain management actually is now transitioning from kind of a functional part of the business to a strategic part of the business. And I think a lot of folks that never really gave it much thought are now realizing that the success of their enterprise may depend on how well that is strategically approached, not just sort of a, let's try to shave 3 cents off of a component in the coming quarter. I'd like to throw this question out to Jim and to Ricardo. So while we've got some issues emerging from alternative suppliers and alternative countries, what about technology? We hear a lot about things like 3D printing that cause us to have closer to home and shorter runs, and maybe even the consolidation of multiple components into a single assembly. What role will new emergent technologies like that play in resolving the supply chain crisis over the next several years? Either one of you can feel free to jump in if you have a thought on that.
So, I'll take that. So, I see technology having, a couple of different impacts. The first is, you mentioned, can it help you in terms of, a redesign so that the components that you need are more readily available, or you have, more available substitutes, or you can more quickly change. In some industries that will work. In ours, actually, the military has a program called Sustainment, where they're looking at how they keep legacy systems running so that the military can maintain preparedness, and they're looking at so building in potentially more flexibility in terms of how they qualify components. So it can help there. On the other side, I think that it's not so much a supply chain, but in terms of, if you're going to have more inefficiencies in your supply chain, so how do you then keep your EBITDA where it needs to be? And so, things like automation can help in terms of reducing, say, your labor costs or making your company more efficient. And then, I think of technology maybe in a way you weren't thinking of, but we're now facing a risky world where you need to do a much more sophisticated analysis, I think, of the risk environment you're looking at. And so I think bringing statistics, which have been around many years, into like more deeply into business operations, even in a small business like ours, is an area where we can help in terms of the risk management. I agree wholeheartedly with Justin, is that I think we now have to continually look at the paradigms, and when we get comfortable, so I fly, and when you're instrument flying, they tell you that if you're if you find that you're idle, you probably aren't doing something you should be doing. I think the same now is in business. If you're kind of coasting along and you think you're comfortable, there probably is a risk that you're not looking at or thinking about, and you should that might be a good time to reassess your situation. I like to tell my team the analogy that the turkey for 364 days a year thinks their lives are risk-free, and they probably haven't been doing the proper assessment. So so those are three areas where I think that technology can make a difference.
Thanks, Jim. How about you, Ricardo? What do you think?
Yeah, I would like to echo the comment that Jim was making about automation. I think that one thing that we have seen over this last year, and kind of applies to pretty much everything we do, is this move towards working remotely and with collaborative systems. And I think that one comment that I have heard recently of one of those surveys, like the ones that you were mentioning at the beginning, is that contrary to what might have been expected, investments in these type of technologies such as, again, tools to work collaboratively, or AI, or robotics, they did not actually reduced. They were not reduced during this pandemic. They were actually increased, and they were actually increased in the area of supply chain. And I think that today, most companies are looking at that as a distinct opportunity to create a competitive advantage. So again, I think that that will really transform permanently the way that we think about, well, many business processes, but very particularly supply chain. I think that the first thing that companies will want to have is a much better visibility of where they are in their supply chain. Where is their product? How many SKUs do they have? Which are the critical components and where are they coming from? And be able to rationalize, and through doing those type of actions, cut costs and become more efficient. But again, you do that by not only upgrading, of course, your teams, and this is another priority that I think we are realizing, but also again investing in things such as AI and robotics, and even the possibility of make the supply chain as autonomous as possible, meaning that it does not need to be touched by a human.
Great points. And I'd like to throw now a question to Justin and Nick. I think when this supply chain crisis started, what most people, myself included, thought was, well, how do we get things made? All these companies went bankrupt. We can't find raw materials. Costs are skyrocketing. But as it turns out, a secondary problem was that if you can get them made, how do you get them here? We had a client, I spoke to just a couple of days ago. They said that the cost for a C box coming from China for them went from 3,800 to 10 to 12,000. So just getting it moved once you've got it is a problem. So the shipping side, which I think we've taken for granted for decades, no big deal. Now, whether it's air or sea, it's problematic, and that's leaving out things like the ship stuck in the middle of the Suez Canal. I don't think we saw that one coming. Nick and Justin, what advice or guidance do you have for companies that have to balance the manufacturing of the thing versus cost of manufacturing versus how do we get it here? And is having it close by an offset that maybe justifies higher prices with less shipping risk? What do you think?
I'll take that. Yeah, so the current way we are handling with our customers, or most of the customers, are that just in the short term, just get it. So we're not changing the unit price, but the customer is able to put those extra or additional costs on top of the material coming in. It may be freight, or it may be getting it from a second source or a different vendor. So it's very difficult right now to give a clear prediction on how things would be. But the main goal for the customer and us is to get the material in. Obviously we are sharing the cost with the customer, in that the customer is absorbing that extra cost. It can be the freight cost versus the raw material cost. So far as the long-term planning for the customer, we are looking at second sources to see if we can minimize the cost on a long term.
Okay. Yeah. So just to go off, I guess, what Nick said, last year in particular, when looking at, we have multiple steel plant operations, we faced similar challenges with getting in PPE. We needed to make sure that our plants were fully stocked, that they were still ready to go, because we do not shut down. We go 24/7. We're fully integrated mill. We're not like some of our competitors in the sense of the electric arc where we can halt. So with that being said, it really had to pivot some of our strategic, just planning that we had in terms of making sure that we had the product there to operate correctly. With that, we didn't have to necessarily renegotiate any contracts, but it was still being able to work through that with the supplier. When taking a step back though, like even from US Steel and thinking about like, how do we do this moving forward? It kind of ties into what we said earlier in terms of if we find a vendor where, say it's overseas, and now our external spend with them for this one commodity is now down 50% because we're finding such a great deal with them. At the end of the day, if we don't take into consideration some of the risks like some that Jim alluded to in terms of them not being able to get us product here. Even if we're saving 90%, if we don't have any product to produce revenue, we're not going to produce any revenue. So I think it ties into the overall strategic vision as well, as making sure that you have loyal partners that you can trust on getting there. If any more shipping, we face any future waves, so to speak. I just think that's going to be critical moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to take some questions from the folks that are out there listening. Feel free to type it in, and then we'll address them to our panel. And we're going to make this a little different as well. We're going to open it up, and so the panelists can jump in. We had a great comment, which was that to the extent that companies facing crisis have to look to their suppliers. Some suppliers, and they're having their own problems, by the way, the folks up and downstream, they've got their own supply chain challenges, but that suppliers that go the extra mile, that are showing their willingness and to help their customers and create loyalty, are really cementing their relationships. And so that in addition to sorting out where can I get parts, where can I get units, we're also addressing how do I build a tighter and more committed supply chain that I can count on during times of crisis. So what do you folks think? I mean, is this a time for like a complete overhaul? Do we, as Ford did a few years ago, tear up the contracts, toss out the playbook, and start from scratch to reassess the supply chain? Or is it more of a tightening up and finding fewer suppliers, but ones that are closer to us? I'll throw that out to anybody on the panel that wants to jump in with an opinion.
I'll start.
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, so for us, I think it's a time to double down with the suppliers that have been, so this is, again, just my opinion, with the suppliers that have been, loyal to you, good to you. It's really hard to find good suppliers. And, I don't know if I mentioned, but we deal with a lot of obsolete parts, where, we can't always redesign because the government, once that our parts are a component into a system, and the prime contractor, the big defense contractor, isn't going to redesign their whole system just so we can, provide a new part. So, in times of trouble, you want to, go with people that have stood by you. I believe you want to, call those suppliers that are rainy day. But for us, after being in business 78 years, we have a good sense of who our strong suppliers are and who our weaker suppliers are, and we want to give more business to the strong suppliers. And then I just add that, but not to do that blindly. So your suppliers have suppliers, and so. You also want to look into, I think now you have to look into your supplier's supply chain and understand, where their vulnerabilities are, because it's kind of like, counterparty risk when you're getting insurance. If the insurer doesn't have the wherewithal to stand behind your claim, then essentially you're paying for no insurance. And the same thing with building supplier relationships. You want to understand what their supply chain looks like as well.
Okay, great. And I think we're just going to have one panelist answer because we've got some other questions coming in. But I would also add to that last point, for everybody on this call, you're a supplier to somebody too. This is a chance for you to cement your relationships by either getting the job done for them or at least showing that you're going the extra mile to help your customers. I had a great question come in. How are people managing price to the customers when the material pricing can surge so much between our request for quote and an actual purchase order? And by the way, surge not only in the unit price of the product, but the shipping cost to get it there, and then maybe even change between PO and actual execution on a large capital project. If you're, we have a client that supplies cable to powerhouses, boy, those projects take years to make. How do you grapple with dealing with quotes that are out of control and making sure that your customers are happy, but you don't take losses? I'll throw that out to anybody that wants to jump in.
I'll take that. So what we have started doing is sharing our cost with the customer. So we are sharing our BOM cost to the customer. And whenever a price increase comes in after the PO, we share the invoicing with our customers. So we have developed this loyalty or trust relationship with our customers where it's strategic. It's simple as, this is our cost, this is our markup. If the cost goes up, it is going to be passed along to our customers. And the more the customer understands that, we bring in a lot of data beforehand the project is kicked in. We do a lot of customers, homework, I would say. We are at that critical stage where we are a contract manufacturer. We are pretty much an extension to our customer. That's how we see it. So we have a big role in the customer supply chain. We cannot say that this is it, take it or leave it. We are in this together, we are a partner, and we seek out vendors, those who are committed to us. So to answer the pricing question, we share our vendors' pricing with our customers just to pass it along. So simple as that, and most of the customers are willing to accept that. We have some contracts in place for past couple of years, and we had to change those contracts to add few line items for these pricing fluctuations. And for the most part, the customers are willing to adjust to the current, the crisis.
I'd like also, though, to throw this up to Justin as well, because with U.S. Steel, you've got very high volume contracts that have to deliver over a long period of time. And those fluctuations, even pre-current crisis, must have been a challenge to maintain pricing levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess one of the things that I'll really harp on with that overall is just one of the things we used even last year and personally was the fact of, well, instead of just raising certain prices to a point that would breach, a customer or a certain supplier, we brought more things into play, such as working capital. That was a tool that we leveraged and we talked more about. Could we meet somewhere on payment terms that would help from a cash perspective, and but still at the same time not completely kill from an external spend? So that's what we did to kind of adjust with revenues and that. But I would say that working capital was the biggest tool we used.
Okay. And we have a specific question for Nick. Do you have visibility into whether IC suppliers are trying to expand capacity, or are they already working at current capacity, and the supply time to expand would be something more of a long lead issue?
So in short term, we just have information on what's going on in the manufacturing world, how they are trying to address. It's like one step forward and two steps back, where not only the IC suppliers are trying to ramp up their post-COVID manufacturing, but also there are a couple, big instances that happen in China where two large manufacturers had fire, and that affect the entire supply chain of IC manufacturing. What we are hearing from the supply chain folks, or not only just our distributor, but I try to be in touch with the manufacturers' representative themselves, is that everybody's trying to ramp up their manufacturing. The post-COVID, there are a lot of constraints, labor shortage, raw material availability is affecting the IC, manufacturing. So we don't have a prediction, or we don't have a clear-cut path to, when this is going to be resolved. So it's one of those things that, each supplier is picking up particular line of ICs, and they're just manufacturing them as and when they can. So our lead times have gone from 8 weeks to right now we are seeing 50 or 60 week lead time. So pretty much that 50, 60 week lead time, they're just telling us that they are just pushing it out for manufacturing. So the clear answer is that we don't have visibility into, when this is going to be resolved.
Okay, thank you. Well, we want to be mindful and respectful of everyone's time. A couple of closing thoughts for the group. First of all, supply chain has really transformed in the last 18 months. And from our point of view, it's not going to go back to the way it was ever. and certainly for at least the next, I would say, 3 to 4 years, as everything resorts itself out, and technology versus reshoring versus shipping options, all of these things, and a lot of new countries that are now aggressively moving in to this space and eager and enthusiastic to find clients are going to change the landscape. And then China's certainly going to have some strategic moves of its own as they figure out their next move on the global economic stage. But supply chain now has become strategic. It's become important to finance, it's become important to venture capital, and certainly everyone on this call knows it's critical to operational issues. I also think that if you're out there kind of hoping it's going to get better and your suppliers are going to slowly get back, you've got to be a little more aggressive at alternative measures. And so this is not a time to be passive. This is a time to really stop and rethink. Strengthen the existing vendor relationships, the people that have been good to you, and I hope all of you are being good to your customers. But at the same time, get some diversification into that supply chain as soon as you can. Diversification within company, diversification within countries, and reconsider redesign as an alternative to give you more flexibility. So I would like to close my portion. Thank our panelists, really capable, wonderful folks who have got a lot of challenges on their plate and took some time out of their day to spend with us. And of course, to Monica and Taylor and everyone at the Pittsburgh Technology Council for allowing us this opportunity to share some insights with you on what is right now one of the most critical business problems that all businesses are facing. Thank you so much.